In the early 2010s, the word Xbox was synonymous with video games as a whole. It seemed like a new competitor had finally taken to the helm and stepped up. Then you look at sales and realise, even their greatest success came last. Xbox is possibly one of the most confusing brands in gaming, with people always hyping up the new console, just for it to end up behind the competition. So that raises the question, why are Xbox seen as a major competitor in the console market? Here, we will take a look into that as we lay all bias aside, and dive into the world of being a neutral gamer. So, before we start this video, I shall introduce today's guest. Welcome, GameFrank.
Happy to be here with you today, Sparrow. Like many gamers, I grew up on Nintendo, but have since branched out into playing and collecting video games for all systems, Xbox included.
Microsoft decided to enter the console market as a result of the success of the PlayStation 1, as well as concerns that the PlayStation 2's native CD and DVD playback could threaten the home computer market as an entertainment device. The Xbox brand was born in 2001 with the launch of the original Xbox console. This was released to be a direct competitor to the PlayStation 2, which was released a year beforehand in 2000.
The codename during early development was DirectXbox, which is a reference to Microsoft's graphics API, DirectX. Unlike most consoles of the time, the Xbox was built using standard PC components and used an adapted version of Windows and DirectX to play games and media. Fun fact, the Xbox was actually the first console to be developed by an American company since the Atari Jaguar in 1993.
The Xbox was the most powerful console of the 6th generation. It had a 733MHz Pentium processor, versus both the PlayStation 2's 294MHz and the GameCube's 485MHz processors. The console also had some revolutionary assets that became standard practice in game consoles, such as a built-in hard drive, and most importantly, online capability through an integrated Ethernet port. With the release of Xbox Live in 2002, the Xbox introduced the world to a full online gaming experience, and games such as 2004's Halo 2 helped make online gaming a popular asset to have. While the Xbox did sell well, outselling the GameCube and Dreamcast, it came a very distant second to the PlayStation 2, which sold a staggering 158 million units in its lifetime, over 130 million more than the Xbox's 24 million units. But, overall, the first venture into the console market was rather successful for Microsoft. They'd innovated in certain areas and had beaten both Sega and Nintendo in sales. This is not where their main success came from, however. In 2005, Microsoft released a successor to the Xbox, the Xbox 360. This console proved to be the turning point that Xbox were waiting for, with the PlayStation 3's far higher price point seemingly relegating PlayStation to their first generation of mediocrity. Xbox had it all in the 7th generation. A cheaper console that was easier to develop for, an amazing lineup of exclusives that included the likes of Halo, Mass Effect and Forza, and most importantly, more people buying the console. Or so it seemed. In reality, after the halfway point of the 7th generation, the PS3 was starting to pick up the pace, after major price reductions, a console redesign, and much more established exclusives, such as Little Big Planet, Infamous, and Uncharted, making people want the console. The media playback also played a part in this console war, as Sony, who developed the Blu-ray disc, opted to have Blu-ray support in their console, whereas Xbox decided to sell a separate peripheral to become an HD DVD player.
And we all know what happened to HD DVDs.
This all culminated in the PS3 pulling off a shock comeback, overtaking the Xbox 360 in the last couple of years, with the help of late exclusives such as Gran Turismo 6 and The Last of Us, making people buy the PS3. even with the PS4 just round the corner. You may notice we haven't mentioned Nintendo yet for this generation, but there's not much explanation needed for how they did. They released the Wii. It sold far more than either the PS3 or the Xbox 360.
To give credit to Xbox, it did outsell the PS3 in the American market, and it finished very close in global sales. This generation definitely wasn't a loss for Microsoft, even though the Nintendo Wii surprisingly dominated.
Honestly, I do think they were unlucky to lose to the PS3. That console war was fun because it was all opinions, and people were passionate about it. I am somewhat on the fence about which I personally prefer, but I do think the Xbox 360 is an amazing console.
While I adored both consoles during their prime, I typically stuck with the Xbox 360 for most third-party games, especially during the first half of the console generation, as third-party games generally ran better on Xbox 360. This was due to games typically being ported from PC to 360 first, followed by porting the 360 to PS3. Because of this, games typically weren't optimized properly for the PlayStation's cell-based CPU, resulting in performance issues such as stuttering and lower resolutions. Overall, the Xbox 360 was just the more reliable platform of the two. This would quickly change though, as the worst for the old Xbox brand was yet to come.
After a successful generation with the Xbox 360, Microsoft had it all to do in the beginning of the 8th console generation. And let's just say it didn't go according to plan. The Xbox One had a cataclysmic launch. Negative press, nasty rumours, and terrible marketing led to the third Xbox console languishing far behind the PS4 in the first years of the console generation.
While yes, the Xbox One had an incredibly rocky launch, with Microsoft initially forcing users to have the Kinect plugged in at all times, and the mandate on an always online connection, fans were not happy. These suspicious antics were quickly taken back, and Microsoft has since been trying to earn back the good grace of their consumers.
The launch of the Xbox One S in 2016 saw the discontinuation of the Kinect, added affordable 4K Blu-ray functionality, and had a much lower retail price than the base model. The Xbox One X would later release in 2017, offering players what, at the time, was the strongest video game console to date. Microsoft also upped its backwards compatibility. They offered drastic visual upgrades, frame rate boosts, and various quality of life changes to many Xbox, Xbox 360, and Xbox One titles, making the Xbox brand one of the most self-conscious of preserving the titles of their past. These both helped boost the sales of the Xbox One to close the gap on the competition. However, none of this managed to save this generation, as the Xbox One came third in sales, far behind both the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, the latter of which was released over 3 years after the Xbox One. It did not come last though, with that dubious acclaim going to the Wii U, with its dismal showing of 13.56 million units sold, which is significantly less than the Xbox One's estimated 50 million units. The third generation of Xbox consoles was one to forget for Microsoft. What started badly with the horror show at E3 ended in a similar fashion, after being beaten more than twofold in sales by a console that was released 3 years later than their entry. So what lies ahead for the Xbox brand? With the launch of the Series X and Series S, Xbox was trying to regain the ground they undoubtedly lost in the previous generation. While the Series X is more powerful than the PS5, it is, as expected, languishing rather far behind the PS5 in terms of sales upon recording. Both consoles have however been hampered by chip shortages, making getting a console near impossible. Frank, you have both, right?
Yeah, Sparrow, I do. I've had both consoles for well over a year now, and I've logged quite a bit of time on each. While the Series X is stronger than the PS5 on a hardware front, it's a marginal difference and not incredibly noticeable on third-party titles. That said, there are plenty of nuances between the two consoles that I prefer over the other, and vice versa. I don't necessarily think that the hardware is what contributes to Sony's success. I think it has a lot to do with Sony's IP, as well as the Sony brand loyalty. While the console race is nowhere near as competitive as it was during the Nintendo vs. Sega days, console favoritism and loyalty still play a big component in PlayStation's success. Microsoft has been doing a lot of really pro-consumer moves. Sure, their monopolistic acquisitions are a bit of a concern, but the accessibility and the value of their Game Pass service, coupled with quite possibly the best backwards compatibility the industry has seen since the Game Boy Advance, are what keep Xbox gamers satisfied. Me being the unbiased gamer I am, who plays anything and everything anywhere, I really love how accessible Microsoft's catalog of games have become.
The way I see it, my relationship with Xbox is like a bizarre attraction. Even though I generally prefer the Japanese consoles, and will always buy them closer to launch, I can never quite stop myself from at least trying to get hold of the Xbox console.
I typically go wherever games play or look the best, but this generation you really can't go wrong either way. It's ultimately going to come down to you as a player and your preferences on exclusivities. Personally, I think Microsoft has earned their spot in the top 3 console manufacturers. While the Xbox brand hasn't been without its faults, they have and continue to make innovations in the games industry. Had Microsoft not filled the void left by Sega, the industry as we know it would be incredibly different.
So, do I feel Xbox are a major power in the gaming world? Yes. If they weren't, why would we be talking about them every single year? Sure, they're not at the level of PlayStation or Nintendo in terms of sales globally, but they have a certain charm about them that draws people in time after time. Xbox are a special brand in the gaming world. They keep Sony on their toes, which is good for everybody, as no one likes a monopolization of a market, even if it's the brand you like. They've taken steps to build the trust of the consumers, and honestly, I think it's time to stop the console wars and just enjoy the games.
Thanks again for having me on the channel, Sparrow. It's been a lot of fun. If you like me, check my channel out, youtube.com/GameFrank. Can I stop? I'm gonna stop. Yeah.